Hello and welcome to an episode of Historically Marked. I am Jason, just outside the home of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the founder of the women's rights movement, according to most people. Some say the credit belongs to Susan B. Anthony, but it's going to be highly debated for many years and decades to come. But I am outside her home, which is part of the national park system, and there are a few historical markers around here. I'll just go ahead and show you and tell you some stuff. All right, here we go. So it is said that it all started in 1840 when Stanton and her husband went to London, England to attend a World Anti-Slavery Convention. There, she met her friend Lucretia Mott, but at the convention, the men wanted the room all to themselves, and they wanted the women separately from all of them behind a curtain where they were not able to see what was going on at the convention. That, of course, struck a nerve with Stanton and her friend, and that's how they say it all began. And that right there is a ranger station for national park people only, meaning the staff. And here's a historical marker in front of it. Here's a picture of Stanton as well as her friend Susan B. Anthony. I'll get the shadow out of the way. In pursuit of women's rights, Elizabeth Cady Stanton developed a network that includes some of the most famous reformers in American history: Frederick Douglass, Lucretia Coffin Mott, and her sister Martha Coffin Wright, William Lloyd Garrison, and most prominently Susan B. Anthony all visited here. In 1857, Stanton beckoned Anthony to Seneca Falls. "We will accomplish wonders," she promised. Anthony challenged and inspired Stanton to new efforts and new methods to do or dare anything. Stanton gave speeches, wrote for local and national newspapers, adopted the bloomer costume, and planned conventions and suffrage drives. In 1860, Stanton achieved a major victory when New York State passed a new law significantly enhancing women's rights. Still, much remained to be done, and Stanton and Anthony pursued the cause relentlessly. And here's a historical marker that was erected in 1932 by the New York State Education Department. Promoter of the first women's rights convention lived here. Convention was held across the river, and the river they're referring to, you probably can't see it, it's behind those trees. But yeah, I mean, in a different video I will show you where the women's convention was, and that of course is where the Women's Rights National Historic Park is, at the Wesleyan Chapel. Here's another historical marker. When the Stanton family moved to Seneca Falls in 1847, the house was nearly twice as large as it now is, but dilapidated and overgrown. Acting as her own general contractor, Elizabeth Cady Stanton hired workers and oversaw its refurbishment. The Stantons named the house Grasmere after poet William Wordsworth's English home, a landscape that inspired some of his poetic dreams. Stanton often managed this household and her family alone. Her husband Henry served in the New York State Legislature, and he was also a lawyer and reformer, and he agitated for the abolition of slavery. Stanton's father, Daniel Cady, gave this house to his daughter. Under the Married Women's Property Act of 1848, a state law that allowed women to retain property received as a gift or inheritance, Stanton owned this property in her own name. She sold it in 1862 when the Stantons moved to New York City. And then here's a picture of it in 1890. As it said, this is a marker, it was much bigger. But hey. And of course, without question, Stanton was a controversial character. I mean, she made many enemies, and according to Winston Churchill several decades later, if you've made enemies, then you're standing up for something. But some also say that if Elizabeth Cady Stanton wasn't so eccentric or cranky or aggressive, she probably would have ended up with her picture on the dollar coin, and with all the credit for starting the women's rights movement. But I mean, she does get some credit for, as it says on there, the promoter of the first women's rights convention. But she spent the rest of her life passionately arguing for women's suffrage and equal legal and work rights. And of course, she also raised a lot of ire when she rewrote the Bible from a women's perspective. But Stanton passed away in 1902, just 18 years before the women's right to vote was passed as an amendment. But her spirit does live on today. All right, well, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Historically Marked. I hope you learned some history about how women shaped America and how they got their rights, or how it all started. So I am Jason in Seneca Falls, New York, signing off.